program? Akiko.
No, you can do that too. I know I'm looking at that. Someone else told me about it, but I'm not.
Okay, I think we're good now. Welcome to the American Islamic College Lecture Series program. We're going to begin in just a moment. I'll give you some time to turn your cell phones, pagers off, and find your seats. Thank you.
So I should turn my cell phone off?
That would be a good idea.
A good idea.
Yes.
Okay. It's always the speaker's cell phone that rings, right? Okay, done.
So, tonight we have with us a distinguished guest, Ms. Anya Cordell. She will be speaking on an ally's journey, standing up to stereotyping, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and appearance-ism. Ms. Anya Cordell is a recipient of the 2010 Spirit of Anne Frank Award. She is a speaker and writer using the universal experience of the injustice of appearance-ism, appearance-based judging of ourselves and others, as a core issue to inspire everyone to combat all types of bias. She founded the Campaign for Collateral Compassion to raise awareness of the post-9/11 backlash against Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, and others, and the murders of innocent members of these groups. She is also the author of Race, an Open and Shut Case, and Where the Anti-Muslim Path Leads. Anya's unique journey as a Jewish woman standing against post-9/11 Islamophobia and xenophobia demonstrates how we can truly bridge cultural barriers, recontextualize current media messages, and create effective initiatives against bias, all while reclaiming our own worth and esteem. Anya's writing and work has been featured in many media outlets, including The Washington Post, USA Today, ABC, Chicago Public Radio, The Chicago Tribune, Radio Islam, and many more. Please give a warm welcome to Ms. Anya Cordell.
Thank you very much. A second here. So, can you all hear me well? See everything well? Is this turned on? This is the one, like that. Is that okay? Better? Okay. So I encourage everybody to sit somewhere where you can see well and be somewhere where you can hear well. And if I talk too softly or too loudly, sometimes people speak too loudly, just go down a little. Okay. So thank you very much for coming, and I want to thank the college for hosting me. So first of all, before I get officially started, let me just say something about the two cards that I gave you, the two blank cards that I gave you. You know, a lot of us plan meetings, we host meetings, we speak at programs, we go to programs, and we vote with our feet. We come into the room because we care about a particular subject. We have interest in it. We may even have a strong passion about that subject. And then at the end of the program, maybe if we have a chance to chat, we might talk to one or two or three or four people and network and exchange business cards. And then we go home. And an incredible resource gets lost because we are the resource. You know, we talk about taking good advantage of the natural resources that we have, and we have people saying, drill, baby, drill, right? Saying, you know, let's tap every available drop of resource. And what I'm saying is that we are also a natural resource. And the things that I'm going to discuss, especially such as xenophobia, Islamophobia, bias, stereotyping, violence in our world around these issues are an enormous, huge problem. Big human problem. Not a Muslim problem, not a Jewish problem, not a Hindu problem, a human problem that will require and does require a big solution. So that means it requires all of us. And so one of those cards is for you, if you are willing, to put your name, your contact information, like an email address, preferably an email address. It could also be a phone number. And that's not enough, though. A couple of words or a line or a sentence or two about what you really care about that brought you here, that you might want to reconnect with somebody else who's in this room and create some networking around, strategize together, talk about together, think more deeply about, create an initiative. So, you know, and then that list would be redistributed back to you. And when you look down the list, you'll see a bunch of names, most of which won't mean anything to you because you won't have had a chance to get acquainted. But if you see somebody whose passion, the couple of lines or words that they've expressed about what they care deeply about, like I would write, for example, Anya Cordell, teasing, bullying, Islamophobia, xenophobia, strategies against stereotyping. So even if you didn't hear my lecture and you saw that, you might say, I'm interested, I want to talk to her, I want to connect with her about those subjects. So that's one thing, only if you're willing, and then the list will be redistributed back to you. And the second card is because I would very much appreciate your feedback. So before you leave, if you're willing to just write a little bit about anything about your response to this talk, then I would be very grateful for that if you want to. And you can do that anonymously or you can add a name to that, either way. So that's what's in front of you. So now, to fulfill my purpose in being here, to tell you a little bit about my journey as an ally and my story and what the program promised to share with you. So on the screen you see the word Appearance-ism.com. That's my website, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. And the title of an article that I wrote, Where the Anti-Muslim Path Leads. And that is an article that I feel quite proud of. It got a lot of play on the internet. Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times put it on his Twitter feed, and Queen Noor of Jordan put it on her Twitter feed, and Ibu Patel. And it goes into a piece of my story that I won't have time to address, but I think you'll find very interesting. And it also elicited some wonderful comments. It also elicited some extraordinarily hateful comments. So that's sort of the nature of the beast. So the next picture that you see is a camp. It's a bunch of students, and it happens to be the Utøya youth camp in Norway, one day, 24 hours before the massacre by Anders Breivik, who committed the horrible atrocities in Norway with explosions and then really terrorized this particular island summer, I don't know if it was a summer camp, a youth camp. There's a very strange comment, caption at the bottom of this slide. Note the faces which are more Middle Eastern or mixed than pure Norwegian. And that is a really weird comment. Now, when I look at this picture, I'm not sure how, it's not showing up very light on this screen. But I can tell you that that if it were showing up the way it's showing up here on the computer for me, there's a lot of blondes. There's a couple of people with sort of fair reddish brown hair. There's a young man who looks like he's Sikh right here, and a couple of kids who are a little bit darker. And the comment was from somebody who perpetrates this sort of ongoing Islamophobia. And so it was railing against the victims. It was a kind of a blame the victim mentality to say that these campers, these youth, were not perfectly innocent. They were multiculturalists. They were mixed. They were not pure Norwegian. And this writer did not shed a tear for this atrocity because, after all, these young people were going to grow up to become terrorists. or support terrorists or apologists for terrorists. So people like me who do multicultural work, interfaith work, people like I'm sure a lot of you, would definitely, be the sort of person that, was being targeted, either literally targeted by this killer or targeted in language and, the machinery that's in motion at the moment, the virulent fomenting of anger and hostility. And I show this slide because what we have is a human problem. We have a human problem. It's not just a Muslim problem. It's not just a Jewish problem relating to anti-Semitism. It's not just a Hindu or South Asian or Latino or black. It is a human problem that we are facing, the way these balls are bouncing back and forth around the world. And so that is the work that I'm trying so hard to do. And I should say, just to, I don't remember if it was in the introduction or not, but I am Jewish, and it is a vital part of my story, and I think it's very integral to my work. So the next slide is a picture of Anne Frank. And many of you, or maybe all of you, already know who Anne Frank is, but just in case there's somebody here who doesn't already know Anne Frank, she was a young girl who grew up in Amsterdam, Jewish family, and when the Nazis came to power, she and her family had to, in order to survive, go into hiding. And they hid in an attic that you can still go visit in Amsterdam behind a bookcase, a secret attic, with a few other families, because their lives were at risk. If they had been discovered, they would be carted off to concentration camps to die. And the reason that they were able to survive for 2 years in the attic was because of the non-Jewish friends and supporters who brought them food, who brought them the necessities of life, and enabled them to survive for those 2 years. And during that time, Anne Frank wrote a diary. And the reason we know her name and her picture and why she is one of the most famous women in the world is because she wrote her diary, and even though eventually the families were all discovered and they were all taken off to concentration camps, and they all did die except for Anne's father, her diary survived. And it has been translated into multitudes of languages and read by vast numbers of people around the world, and it has touched vast numbers of people. And when I read the Diary of Anne Frank as a young Jewish girl, adolescent, what was so powerful to me in the story, I mean, it's all very powerful, but this idea that non-Jewish people took these incredible risks that they didn't need to take, that put them at the same risk that her family was at. If they had been discovered, they would have also been killed. And I asked myself if I could possibly ever have the kind of courage that those people had. And I think that is a question that is important for us to ask ourselves. I don't think it's an easy question to answer, and I don't think I've answered that question to myself yet, because the kind of risks that they took were really phenomenal. But I do think that it was a very important question, and it has a lot to do with my thinking about how important it is to be an ally for groups other than your own. It's very easy for us to say, I care about my family, I care about my ethnicity, I care about my group, but for us to cross the barriers and be allies for other groups than our own. So this happens to be a picture of me as an adolescent. And by chance, by circumstance, we all get born into whatever family we get born into. And my family, my parents, happened to be, for I think some very interesting reasons, but as it turned out, they were very, very concerned with issues that related to fashion and beauty. And these were extremely important ideals for me and for my siblings to meet these standards of fashion and beauty. And I worked very, very hard because, when you're born into a family you're not choosing, to be born into an Amish family, a Muslim family, a French family, an Italian family, a black family, a rich family, a poor family. You're just born. And for a certain part of our lives, we pretty much have to ascribe to the values that we are born into. And most of us stick with a lot of that culture for our whole lives. Those are the holidays, those are the foods, those are the values, that's the religion that we come up with, and so we accept them, we celebrate them. That's what we do. And maybe we make different choices when we're young adults or adults, but we're not going to make those choices like as a 4-year-old. Most of us are not 4-year-old rebels to rebel and do things differently. So when I was in high school, Twiggy was the supermodel of the moment, and I was trying very hard to look somewhat similar to this and do my eye makeup. Oh, we don't have her. Now she's here. Okay. I'm looking at a split screen, so if I seem to be talking about something that isn't what you're seeing, I'm looking at 2 slides. Just tell me it's the next one, and we'll get the right one on the screen for you. So in order to try to aspire to this, I was wearing false eyelashes to high school, but I was even cutting the false eyelashes into little individual clumps and gluing those clumps on one by one, which was the fashion of the day. So eventually, after quite a few years, decades, I came to realize that I was spending a tremendous amount of my time and energy and passion and my personal resource on an issue that didn't seem to have a name. But I decided it needed a name, and I called it Appearance-ism. And that's why my website is Appearance-ism.com. And I use Appearance-ism to mean appearance-based judging of ourselves and others. And what happened was that I began to think, I'm not sure I want to be spending this much time and energy on this issue. I mean, everybody wants to look kind of nice and acceptable and all of that, and I still do. I sometimes say I'm a recovering appearanceistic person. I am not recovered. So, I still care. And I think that's important, actually. When I speak to young audiences, I say I'm not talking about, never take a bath and walk down the halls of your school and say, well, tough, this is the way I look, and like it or leave it, because that's also not appropriate, obviously, in our culture. But what I am saying is that I realized that I didn't want to be judged solely on the basis. I realized that my inner worth it wasn't just limited to this outside shell. And I didn't want to judge other people on that basis. I began to notice that I was virtually always wrong, that when I did that, I never had the full story. So if you'll indulge me for just a moment, I'm going to ask you to you can do this at your seats really easily. And that is, I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to put maybe one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. We talk about how we have this sort of wisdom that comes from our center, from our belly. And just for a moment, pay attention to who you know yourself to be, who you know you really are on the inside. So, we all try very hard, I think. We sometimes make mistakes, but we are, we have these histories and these threads and things that we've heard, things that we've learned, what we grew up with in our families. All of that played into us becoming who we are. We know how hard we try and care about things and who we really are. But how often do we walk down the street and feel like what we're paying attention to right now, is the way we're being seen by others? That doesn't happen so often. And nor are we seeing each other. We're not really getting that full story about who you are, because there's always more to the story. There's always more sides, more information, something deeper. And what would it be like if the world were safer and really celebrated us to be who we are, really acknowledged us and celebrated that. So all of that started to kind of revolve in my mind. And so I started to ask myself, how does this change happen where we begin to have ideas about people's worth and value based on appearance and fashion? And fashion was, as I said, very important to me and to my family. So this little object is a perfect-sized replica of a Chinese-bound foot shoe. And you see what size it is. It is teeny tiny. And this was the fashion for an adult Chinese woman that lasted for 1,000 years in China. This was not a fashion of a decade, or 100 years, or a few hundred years. For 1,000 years, what was the fashion? Meant that you had to have your little girl, she might have a few years of fun and happiness and joy just running and playing, and then the foot binder would be brought around, and the foot binder would bend her foot very, very tightly under and bind it so tightly. The mother wouldn't do it because the child would scream in agony, and the mother might relent and loosen the binding. So it had to be the foot binder. And finally, eventually, the foot would grow into this deformed little stump. And sometimes gangrene would set in. Sometimes it would be crippling. Sometimes the child could even die. But if you didn't do this to your daughter, she wouldn't be considered marriageable. It became the fashion. And what interests me about this and some other examples I'm going to go through kind of quickly is that we can be convinced to do some very, very odd things, some really crazy things. And we can really be moved to do things that don't seem to make any sense. They just don't seem logical. And as well as fashion, we are susceptible to fashionable attitudes. And that is part of the reason why I'm going to run through these examples quickly. Now, we could do a whole study about all of this and bring in examples from lots of different cultures, but this is in Africa, also in Myanmar. There is this practice of stacking these necklaces until the girl's shoulders are actually pushed down. If they take the necklaces off, they can't hold their heads up. And it's not just women. Men also have some peculiar things that we could bring lots of examples, but again, in the interest of time, so here are some other interesting examples. And how can we be convinced to do things that seem so contradictory to what seems logical, healthy, happy, celebrating what it means to be human? Why are some of these things so extreme, and why do we buy into them? And of course, we have them in our own culture, right? We have extreme makeovers and liposuction and tanning and tattoos and all kinds of things that we could talk about in our own culture. When you're in the culture, you tend not to notice how crazy or strange they seem. When you're outside the culture, like we are outside the Chinese foot binding culture, then we have some distance and we say, well, that's ridiculous and bizarre. So the next slide that I'm going to show you in a moment, I kind of like to prepare for it a moment, because one of the things in our culture that we obviously seem to value and prize very highly, especially for women, but not just for women, is to be very thin, very, very thin. And so when as I said, I do programs for all different ages, ranging from like 5th grade through senior citizens. So when I go into schools in particular, and I started thinking about this little slice of the issue, at some point I was like, well, I'm going to bring a slide of some girls particularly, but it's not just girls, who are bulimic and anorexic and are so painfully thin to demonstrate what a strange fashion that is, you know, to starve oneself to death almost, or sometimes literally to starve oneself to death. And I found some amazing pictures of particularly young women who looked like concentration camp victims. They were fashionably dressed, but they looked so terribly thin. And I thought, well, of course that will show anybody how, you know, awful this is and how counter this is to anything that makes any kind of sense. And as I researched it further, I learned that in fact there are websites that are considered pro-Anna and pro-Mia for anorexia and bulimia, and no matter how emaciated the photo is, people will say, that's my ideal, and I want to try to look like that. So I decided I will not show those pictures. Instead, I found this picture. And I use this picture, as sad as it is, because when we look at this picture, we see that this is a suffering creature. This is a starving, suffering creature. This is not fashionable. This is not beautiful. And I use it to just demonstrate how off base we can be, how we can be manipulated and absorb and accept things that just aren't logical. And that also happens in other ways. Now, all of these things that I've been talking about are arbitrary. They're arbitrary values. There's no particular reason why, you know, this is more beautiful than a foot. You know, why one kind of glasses frame is fashionable now and another glasses frame is no longer fashionable, like mine are not so fashionable anymore. And so we might be convinced to go out and put down, you know, $200 or $300 or $400 for new glasses, even though I don't need a new prescription, because it's part of the cultural norm, and we participate in the cultural norm. And as I said, that's not the end of the world, and we all do that to some extent. But when it takes us into realms of being so destructive, either towards ourselves or towards other people, or destructive attitudes, that's when I think it's very important to think about. The reason that I'm setting up this context is to set up that premise. So at some point in my life, as I began to work very hard around this issue of appearance-ism and write about it and speak about it, I encountered this young woman, who, again, I think I may have had the different slide on the screen than I was talking about, so let me know if you think that I'm talking about the slide that's about to come. This young woman is an artist. She was born in Taiwan, and she was born with distinct differences of her hands and feet. So she, as you can see, only has 2 appendages on her hands and feet. And when she was a baby, her mother kept her in those little baby mittens until she was about 4 years old and was very ashamed of her. And finally, she just pulled the mittens off when she was 4 and said, I've had enough of this. And she became an artist, an incredible artist, and she uses her art to highlight, and a disability activist, and she uses her art to highlight and celebrate herself as is. And so I initially encountered this exhibit that she did that was titled Imperfect, I'm Perfect, which I think is a brilliant use of language, just a really perfect and wonderful, brilliant use of language that we all could kind of put on our mirrors at home, and we could remind ourselves about that. So I incorporated this into my programs for a long time and talked about how inspiring she was to me and how courageous I thought she was. And then, you know the expression, you teach what you most need to learn? So I'm a living, breathing example of that all the time. And I think that is why I am so passionate about that. And actually, if you read that article, Where the Anti-Muslim Path Leads, you will find out why I actually feel that my life depends, my sort of worth in life and emotional self-worth depends on my doing this work. So because I needed to teach this in order to learn it. So one thing that happened to me, remember I was this kind of fashion, beauty obsessed teenager, grew into an adult. I still care about it. A number of years ago, I had an infection in my jaw. And so having used the example of the young artist for a number of years at that point, I had to ask myself, am I as brave as she is? Would I ever be as brave as she is? So I had this series of pictures taken. And I have since had reconstructive dental surgery. I'm very grateful that I could afford it, that it was available to me, that I didn't have to, there are countries where people absolutely cannot avail themselves of that kind of medical care because the bombs are falling, the dentist isn't there, there's no money for it anyway. But we look at pictures of people who are missing their teeth and we say that's a bum. That's our stereotype. We have stereotypes, they're taught to us. We learn them in movies, who's the hero, who's the villain. They're based on appearance, how dark, how big, how unattractive, how beautiful. And our stereotype of the person without teeth is that that person is a bum. So I forced myself, and I can tell you it was absolutely a monumental personal struggle to put this picture into the program. And the first time I saw it on a big screen, I almost fell over. It was really, really, really hard to do. But now I can do it pretty easily. And mostly when I look at the picture, I go, push your glasses up, comb your eyebrows, So anyway, it's interesting to see the feedback that this elicits from students, in particular young people. This is an example of another very inspiring woman who obviously has, some sort of an issue that she really, she was born literally without legs. She is a dancer, and she is a phenomenal dancer. Her dance troupe is called Grooveability, and there you can find on the internet, and she is strong and sensual and celebrates herself as is, and she is just another incredibly inspiring person, and I like to use that example as well. So I'm talking about, is it safe for us to be as is? Is it safe for us to walk in the world as is? Is it safe for us to look in the mirror and treat ourselves with dignity and respect as is? And as is, to me, incorporates our appearance, our abilities, our age, our religion. It is not a crime to be born into a particular religion, even though sometimes it's treated as if it were a crime. Certainly for Anne Frank and her family and many, many other people. The Jewish people who were the victims of the Holocaust, they weren't the only victims. There were Roma victims and homosexual victims, and people with disabilities were also victims of the Holocaust. It was not safe. It was treated as if it was a capital offense to be a Jew or a Roma or somebody with disabilities or somebody who's gay. And all of these things, I feel, are what we have to stand in contradiction to. We have to stand and say, no, that is not appropriate. And how this happens, there are studies about advertising, and if you repeat things often enough, you can convince people of almost anything. This happens to be one just very famous experiment. You can look it up on the internet. The blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment was a teacher in the 1950s of a fourth grade classroom. In the course of one class period, in the course of 1 hour, she was able to convince her students that the blue-eyed students were inferior to the brown-eyed students, and that they were less polite, they were less smart, they were dirtier. And within one class period, the children were playing out all of the typical traditional roles, the teasing, the bullying, the internalizing. The blue-eyed kids began to, have a posture that was very downtrodden and ashamed of themselves. And this wasn't an appropriate human experiment because she was using these children like human guinea pigs. Nonetheless, it is very famous. It has been replicated. There are other variations of how quickly you can convince people. The Stanford prison experiment is also something that is similar if you want to look it up. And that is, just one way of showing how quickly, just because somebody says something doesn't make it true. We know that. And just because somebody screams something doesn't make it true. And just because something gets repeated over and over and over again doesn't make it true. But it can feel true. that's what happens. And every war and every genocide that has been perpetrated has had a media component. It's had a propaganda component. And so, for example, there was a case that was put forward to support slavery in this country. It was a very academic, it was put forth by scholars and academics, and it was very systematic, and this is why you can be a good Christian and you can still hold slaves. Thomas Jefferson, who we revere, who was an amazing, person holding the ideals of our country, held slaves. And this past year I went to Monticello, his home, and I was immersed in loving him and hating him at the same time. I was like, there was a battle that was raging inside myself, because it is his ideals, actually, the ideals of this country, that brought my grandparents to this country for those ideals of freedom and democracy and equality. That's why they came here. That's why they fled Russia and the part of the world that sometimes was Russia and sometimes was Poland and was definitely not safe for Jews. And in fact, my grandfather's family, he was the only one who ended up getting out. So part of my family disappeared in the Holocaust. But even before the Holocaust, it wasn't safe for Jews in those parts of the country. So those kinds of ideals are what brought so many of us and our ancestors to this country. And yet, this person had this contradiction. Because the case had been made so strongly that slavery was appropriate and necessary. And so I think it's just so important for us to remember that the case for, also I wanted to mention that the case for what we did to the Native American population in this country was put forward very systematically. And somehow or another we buy into this. We buy into the propaganda that accompanies war, why it's okay to decimate this group, why, having drones drop bombs on these innocent people is somehow different than if a bomb dropped on our innocent families. So just to move ahead in my personal story, in 1999, this man who was my neighbor was murdered in front of my house by a white supremacist. And the young man grew up in a nice neighborhood in Wilmette, and somehow he fell under the sway of the white supremacy movement, and he was gunning for blacks and Jews and Asians on the 4th of July weekend of 1999. And he killed this man, and he also killed a Korean graduate student. He shot him in the back on the way into church, and he wounded some Orthodox Jews in Rogers Park and shot at Asians in Northbrook. He ultimately was cornered by the police and is no longer with us. So why? Why would something like this happen? How does this kind of ideology begin to permeate people's minds? And we know that there are people who are susceptible, and in some ways we are susceptible. We are all somewhat susceptible to making judgments about one another based on stereotypes, based on that exterior, based on the label. What religion are you? What color are you? What shape, what size, you are. Whatever it is that makes us feel like it's us and them. It's us and them. So this is actually a book that I wrote, Race, an Open and Shut Case, that I'm not going to talk about because it goes off into a little bit of another angle, but it in part is my, it's a double-sided book. There's an open case and a shut case. So you read it from either side first, like a Spanish-English dictionary. You pick it up and you sort of decide how to read it. And it's a very sort of simple parable, but it's meant to address this issue of how many races are there? What is race? And often we use race, and it's just sort of a tag word for difference. So, and I also wanted to write something that would be appropriate for children all the way up through adults to re-examine these ideas that we carry that we may not even ever stop to question. And also, what do you say to your child when somebody was murdered in front of your own house? How do you begin to explain that? And I have to say that as a mother, whose child is now grown up, my child has seen so much destruction. In the last 10, 15, 20 years, we have witnessed as a culture untold destruction that I certainly didn't grow up with. I didn't grow up with a murder. I didn't grow up watching towers fall down. I didn't grow up with seeing school children on the news, you know, like the first picture that I showed you of the youth camp, the kinds of things that we are all being exposed to on a daily basis, and how to teach and explore this. This is just a headline. One of the things that we did in my community that I was very involved in organizing were walks. We decided to meet every night on at the intersection where the murder occurred, 7 nights a week, and walk together as a community. And what became very interesting for me from that was that I realized that this was an incredible initiative and strategy. And the reason I think it was incredible, and it's very easy to replicate, and I really want people to be thinking about initiatives and strategies and what can we do, and, you know, very, very practical ideas. So this particular idea, what was great about it was that nobody had to set up a meeting. Nobody had to set up the chairs, the coffee, you know, at a church or a synagogue or a community hall. And because it was ongoing, because it was every single night, I'm not saying that we could get people out every single night for a kind of community walk, but the ongoing nature of it, the fact that it was repetitive, got people who normally don't talk to each other, do not interact. I live in a community where a big contingent of the community are Catholics who have been in the neighborhood for years and go to the parish schools, and now we have a big influx of Orthodox Jewish families. And then we have some families like mine that just don't fit in anywhere. And but what was really interesting was that people came out and they walked and talked together on a regular basis, and some very strange, unusual alliances and friendships grew out of this. So there are such things as unity walks and interfaith walks, but they tend to be once a year, annual, you know, 9/11 interfaith walk. And I'm saying that, like if a college or the city of Chicago or the city of Evanston or Skokie would say, we want to have these walks, and the purpose of the walks is to walk our talk. The purpose of the walks is for people to come together. You know, Skokie has the Festival of Cultures and says that we have, I don't remember, 60-some cultures in the town of Skokie, but they don't know each other. They're not crossing into each other's lives and living rooms. They might go to the Festival of Cultures and see the Bangladeshi dance and the Korean dance and the, you know, eat Japanese food or, you know, whatever, but they leave and it hasn't really changed something substantial on the inside. So we have to figure out, how do we get into each other's lives and living rooms, and how do we get ourselves invited into each other's lives and living rooms? In other words, I want to do something that will make you invite me into your home so that we can start to forge a friendship. And I certainly have found that being an ally does that. So now to skip to 9/11, obviously, you know, this was a terribly shocking event for all of us. And I was immersed in these issues of appearance-ism and racism and stereotypes. And after 9/11, within a few days, there were some attacks. There was backlash that was being directed towards Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, South Asians. And there was a teeny little bit of this that was appearing in the news, because the big news stories, of course, were the towers and the planes and the Pentagon. But just a little bit, and I was fascinated and really riveted by this subject. I was just completely compelled to keep learning more and more and more about it. And so as I started to delve into this subject, somebody said to me, oh, you have to look up on the internet this cartoon called The Binge. It's a great way to teach kids about 9/11. So I looked up this animated caricature called The Binge. The day that I looked it up, it had 400,000 hits, and it was The Binge. This is The Binge, which was named after Bin Laden, like the Grinch that stole Christmas. This is Bin Laden, The Binge. And the poem that went with this cartoon was, the Binge hated the U.S. the whole U.S. way. Now, don't ask me why, for nobody can say. It could be his turban was screwed on too tight, or the sun from the desert had been too bright. But I think the most likely reason of all was that his heart was 10 sizes too small. And I was outraged. I was like, this is a terrible way to teach children about 9/11. Obviously, to say that, it could be that his turban was screwed on too tight. I really did not believe that that in our day and age at the moment, if, when a horrible crime is perpetrated by somebody who's Christian, that you would have a poem that would say, I think that his crucifix seared a hole in his heart. Or if it was a Jewish perpetrator, maybe his yarmulke was pinned on too tight. Or if it was somebody black, maybe his darkness discolored his heart. I think in our political correctness, for the most part, obviously the white supremacists would probably think that a couple of those examples that I said were fine. But I think generally at this moment in time, we wouldn't consider those to be acceptable. So this the turban was screwed on too tight. I found this really appalling. And in fact, one of the people who was murdered shortly after September 11th, on September 15th of 2001, was this man, Balbir Singh Sodhi, who was Sikh, who wore a turban as part of the tenets of his Sikh religion. Perfectly innocent man. I'm now very good friends with his family in Arizona. And after 9/11, for the couple of days that he lived between 9/11 and when he died, there were already attacks on Sikhs in the community, and he was already aware of the dangers. But he was not going to take his turban off, because this was a firm tenet of his faith. And so one of the things that he did, and many people did, as we can remember, is that they went and they bought American flags to put in their places of business or in their windows to demonstrate, I am an American, I am a member of this community, and he was a beloved member of his community. So he walked out of the store, which was actually sold out of American flags by then, and there was a jar at the entrance for the Red Cross that was collecting funds on behalf of the victims of September 11th. And he emptied his wallet. He put all of his money that he had in his wallet that day, which happened to be about $75, into this jar for the Red Cross. And he went back to the gas station that he operated, and he was murdered by a man who had sat in a bar for 2 hours bragging that he was going to kill the ragheads responsible for September 11th. So this happens to be a less formal picture of him with his brother. This is a picture of a family of an Egyptian Christian man who was also murdered on that same day in San Gabriel, California. And he, sadly and ironically enough, had brought his family to this country for greater religious tolerance. And he was murdered 4 days after 9/11. This man, Vasudev Patel, was Hindu. He was from India. And I later came to learn that he was just an extraordinarily generous human being. You could pull into his gas station without enough money to pay for gas and drive away with the promise that you would return and pay him later, which is, to me, just completely unfathomable. I would never dream of driving into a gas station and saying to the owner or the operator, hey, I really need to fill my tank. Is it okay if I pay you later? But I now know that he was that person, and he did that repeatedly. And the reason that I know that is because, having amassed this great amount of research that I was doing and just compiling all of this data that really wasn't showing up in the major media, and thinking what can be done on behalf of these families and what can be done about this issue, and this issue needs to be told on a national basis. I had a list of so many of these victims, people who were murdered around the country in the days and weeks following 9/11. And I was looking at the local newspaper articles that related to these stories and seeing if there was a name of a local mayor or a clergyman or the gas station or wherever it was that people were associated with these crimes, and I ended up with this list of names and phone numbers. And one day I picked up the phone and I called this gas station, and I called this woman who you see me on the slide with. And of course, I didn't know her at the time, and I just said, and she worked where her husband had worked. She worked exactly where her husband had died because she had no choice, because she had 2 children and 2 parents to support, and she had to keep putting one foot forward in front of the other and moving on with her life. And I called and I said, I'm so sorry. I read about what happened to your husband. I just want to tell you how sorry I am. And we stayed on the phone together for over 30 minutes. And I heard all of the transactions. I heard the sales of the gum and the candy and the gas and the lottery tickets and all of that. And she would put the phone down while she would interact with the customers. And then when they would leave, she would pick the phone up and cry. And I just kept saying, I am so sorry. I am so sorry about what happened. And so as the years went by and I continued to be so involved with this subject, we became close friends. And this particular picture was taken, I've lost track, but maybe 5 or 6 years later. I've had students say, well, why are you smiling? Why is she smiling? That's so callous if you're standing right where her husband died. And I have to say, well, because this is her life. This is where she works. She has to move forward. She has to smile every once in a while. Thank goodness she can still smile on rare occasions, because her life is very, very, obviously hard. Yeah, did you?
Were the attackers, were they convicted for these crimes?
Some of them were, and some of them were never found. Give me a second. So some of them still walk freely and have never been found. Some of them, this particular murderer died on death row in Texas, was executed in Texas this last July. He killed 2 men. He killed Mr. Patel. He killed another man. And in between those 2 murders, he blinded a man in one eye who survived. And that man happened to have been Muslim, and he went on the Hajj, and he later decided that his understanding of Islam was that he should fight against the death penalty of his perpetrator, of the man who tried to murder him. And he fought like crazy to prevent him from being executed. He didn't succeed. I actually have a picture of him later on, toward the end of the slides. So it's just different stories about what happened to the perpetrators. That guy was cornered by the police, and something happened. He either committed suicide, or the police. I don't know officially what happened. It was a little murky the way the reports were told. I wanted to introduce briefly the man on the right. We're still at the station. This isn't me. This is another friend, Mrs. Patel, and another friend. And on the right is a man who is Muslim and from Pakistan, who ran a gas station a couple of blocks away from Mr. Patel's station. And he said to himself, it could have been me. It was just luck or destiny that the guy who was murdered was Mr. Patel. And because of that, he made it his business to be like a personal guardian angel for the family. And he did incredible things, including paying his own employee to go and help Mrs. Patel every day for a few hours so that she could go to the bank and pick up her kids from school. And he did it for years. I think he was really like an American hero, an amazing guy. Didn't know this family before the murder. And one of the things that really interested me about this was that Muslims and Hindus and Indians and Pakistanis are supposed to, hate each other. And the stereotype is that, that's not a supportive, friendly relationship. But of course, we know that stereotypes, don't tell the whole story at all. And I always like to sort of hold up Sam as a beautiful example of a Muslim male, because of course we have so many examples of Muslim males in the media that are a different stereotype. So inevitably, the question arises, well, there is such a thing as terrorism, and it's dangerous, and it's horrible, and we have to do something about it, and of course we all agree with that. And so, if we have to solve these problems of terrorism, and we have to connect the dots, we have to have good intelligence, good police work, people who are working very hard to figure out where are the real dangers in our culture. Interestingly, they didn't connect the dots before 9/11. They didn't connect the dots to figure out that the Christmas underwear bomber was on a plane, right? That was, subdued by the passengers and all of that. The guy who was going to bomb Times Square, those dots weren't connected. In fact, it was a Muslim vendor who said there's something fishy about what's going on here and called, and that's why that attack didn't happen. But nonetheless, it's really important. We want to be safe. We want our families to be safe. Nobody wants to be the victim of these atrocious attacks that we've all witnessed way too often. So if you want to connect the dots, it's not useful to throw a million more dots onto the screen, right? When the Oklahoma City bombing happened, and it happened to have been a white perpetrator, a white guy in blue jeans, it wouldn't make sense to round up all the white guys in blue jeans and say, well, we're rounding them up because they might be a danger. Well, we know that we wouldn't do that because white guys in blue jeans aren't the stereotypical bad guy. Somebody else is the stereotypical bad guy. But it takes up way too many resources. If you throw everybody into the same basket and you make everybody equally suspicious, we don't have those kinds of resources to ask everybody questions, to delve and figure it out. It just gets in the way of doing really good intelligence work. But unfortunately, that's what a lot of people are suggesting and talking about and fomenting. And there are countless examples, and this is just one, of a congressional representative saying, arrest every Muslim who comes across the state line. This is a picture of a barbecue restaurant, safest restaurant on earth, no Muslims inside. There are just, I could bring hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of examples, but we see these in the news, so I'm not going to take the time right now. But this particular one I find so interesting and so disturbing. This was a cartoon that appeared on the editorial page of the Columbus Dispatch, Columbus, Ohio Dispatch. And it is a picture of the map of Iran is in the middle with the countries around it, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Afghanistan. And Iran is portrayed as a sewer grate with cockroaches streaming out of it. So this kind of imagery is the imagery that has accompanied, this was the kind of imagery that was used by the Nazis. Here's a Nazi image that's quite similar. When you start talking about the other as vermin, dirty, dangerous, overpopulated, subhuman, then it becomes really easy to say, we'd be better off. In fact, we have to proactively destroy them because otherwise they will destroy us. And one of the other things that's typically done, also during the Rwanda genocide, this image of cockroaches was being drummed through this 24-hour radio, that the other were the cockroaches. Destroy them before they destroy us. So making the enemy or the other ugly is a very traditional thing. This particular picture that I found on the internet, there they go again, ugly inside and out. I'm at a loss to know what's ugly about these women splashing in the water. Here is again Nazi caricature of the ugly Jew, and here, of course, is an image of one of the people who was the real victim. So we're trying to get deeper. We're trying to get down to the level of truth, not to the level of appearances or false ideas or false things that we are able to absorb. You know, when people, I'm constantly reading the worst of the Islamophobic stuff. I'm just, somehow I'm compelled to always try to pay attention and read what is being said, what is being written, what is being disseminated. And you know, I want to say to these people who are making a lot of money, garnering votes, getting power, you know, from doing these things, from saying these things, I want to say, well, wait a minute. If Muslims are roughly 1/5 of the world's population, and they're waking up every morning, and the first thing on their mind is death and destruction, and converting and killing everybody who isn't Muslim, they are a big portion of the Earth's population. If they wanted to do that, there'd be a lot more destruction going on in our communities. It's not logical. It makes no sense. We know there are bad actors of every persuasion who are doing atrocious, horrible things, but to say that the entire group, you know, has this as their goal, it's illogical. We know what people do when they wake up in the morning. They wake up and they try to figure out how are they going to feed their family, and how are they going to keep a home, and how are they going to get an education, and how will they celebrate some holidays and birthdays. And that's what most people in the world are concerned about doing on a daily basis, like everybody else. So I'm very, you know, interested in how do we cross the bridges? How do we cross these bridges? And as I said before, how do we get into each other's lives and living rooms? And in actuality, we don't do such a good job of that most of the time. We tend to invite into our living rooms the people from our own whatever, however you define your own group. I spoke at a big conference in Washington, D.C. on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and there were a few thousand people, all Muslim, were the audience. And I got some really wonderful and interesting feedback about this issue of lives and living rooms, and one young woman wrote to me and said, you know, I thought about it, and I don't invite anybody who isn't Muslim into my living room. I never have. So I went down to the neighborhood knitting store, and I wanted to learn knitting, and I talked to the woman there, and I said, will you come into my living room and teach me, and I'll teach you. I'm not sure what she was going to teach her, cooking or something else, and they had this little exchange, and it was wonderful, and she was inspired, and I was very, very, very pleased by that. And as I said, I have found that being an ally, when you reach out and you're an ally, you get invited into the rooms and into the living rooms. And we can start to make these personal connections. It's only when we're making these personal connections that we really become more and more, I mean, the more I've done this, the more committed I am to doing it. Because now it's my friends who are being criticized, who are being talked about. It's my friend who wears a hijab who I worry about, and I worry about her daughter and what will happen as she walks down the street. And it's very personal to me. It's as, they are my group now. They are my group. It's not that I'm crossing to their group. They're my group. We're part of the same family. And I forgot to mention it, but one of the really interesting comments that that article that I told you about at the beginning from Islamophobia Today, one of the comments was that the next Anne Frank hiding in an attic in Amsterdam will be a young girl wearing a hijab. And I thought that was a very poignant comment. And also, as I'm speaking about comments at the end of a program in a high school, a young boy came up to me and he said, "Thank you so much for your program. I'm Muslim, but nobody here knows it," which I thought was just so chilling to think that he had to pass in order to try to pass in order to be safe. And there certainly have been times in our country when people who were fair-skinned tried to pass as white because they could have a better, safer life. They could, do better economically. And of course, there are stories of Jews in the Holocaust who passed as non-Jews in order to survive. Just a very, very chilling, sad comment. I was also at a panel. I spoke on a panel, and a man got up, and he said, "I just want to say that every single day my son says to me, 'Daddy, why do we have to be Muslim?'" Which is so sad. So to think of the trauma, we know that when our children are teased or bullied, it tears us up inside. And to imagine that that children are being, characterized on a daily basis, stereotyped and maligned on a daily basis, so that every single day they feel like they're the wrong something, the wrong religion, the wrong culture, the wrong size, the wrong shape. Mommy, why do I have to be Jewish? Or why do I have to be this color? This is a trauma that is becoming deeply ingrained into people in our culture and into all of us, in various ways. So, I feel like the most important thing is that we have to think of how to contradict this. This picture is from the New York Times, and it happens to be a Muslim contractor who donated his services to a Jewish congregation to build a synagogue because the congregation couldn't afford the services of the contractor. So it's an amazing story in the New York Times. This is a picture from Billings, Montana, where a family put a menorah in their window at Hanukkah for the holiday of Hanukkah, and somebody threw a rock through the window, and the response of the town was to print full-size paper menorahs in the local newspaper, so people cut out these menorahs and pasted them in their windows. So the whole town was in solidarity and saying, it was like the Danes who wore the yellow stars and said, we're all Jews. Or right now this week, we have people wearing hoodies saying, we're all Trayvon Martin. These kinds of initiatives that are attempts, we have to attempt to do something to change this dynamic. This is a picture of Race, and he's he's the man who survived the killing, and this is after, recently, taken within the last year or two. He's in front of the station where he worked. He was a pilot in the Bangladeshi Air Force, a very highly educated guy who came to the United States, like so many people come, for education and opportunity, and he was working part-time at this station when he was shot. Here's a picture of him after the shooting. And his story is incredible, and it went around the world, and he has influenced many people, including the murderer, who was so moved by what Race did for him and tried so hard to do for him that his final words before he died were, there's too much hate in this world. Hate has to stop. So it transformed this very, very, very hateful person. And this is actually my living room, where every year we have a sharing event. We invite people to bring stories and poems and work in progress and play in progress and artwork and puppet shows and anything that they want, and just share that so that we can begin to connect with each other as human beings. And incredible relationships have grown out of that. And so finally, the last thing that I want to say is how important I think it is, as I said before, for us to network together, work together, strategize together, or as individuals to think, what can I do? What one small, profound act can I do to make a difference? And there's a wonderful little story about the weight of a snowflake. What is the weight of a snowflake? Nothing. Inconsequential. I don't even know if it can be weighed. So it's nothing. But you accumulate enough snowflakes, and we've certainly seen this in Chicago, that snow falls, it falls, it falls, it falls, and finally the last snowflake comes down and hits that tree, and the branch breaks, or the roof caves in. So as tiny as our act might be, it is consequential. And that little exercise that I asked you to indulge me in, what can we do to make the world safe for these people, the people who are on the inside of all of us, those whole, full human beings who are trying so hard, who are not just we're not just the shell that we show the outside world, the age, the size, the shape, the color, the religion, the religious garb. We are a person with a big, big story. And how can we make the world that we want to live in, that safe world that we want to live in, that will be safe for us, make it safe for all of us? So thank you so much.
Anybody have any questions?
I just say that I'm very happy to entertain comments as well as questions, that if something has stirred for you or something that you would like to share with us, you don't have to simply ask questions of me. And I also do want to say that I am so concerned with how we can do this. So remember I asked you about filling in the cards with your name and contact information and a few words of what you might be interested in, as well as the other card for feedback. And I also want to say I am a resource. I'm a resource. I hope that people will go back to their own faith communities or corporations or schools and think, yeah, maybe I could bring this program somewhere else. And I also have my book if you're interested in that. But I'm very happy to entertain just comments as well as questions and anything that this has brought up for you.
My name is Salim Akhtar. I'm the National Director for American Muslim Task Force on Civil Rights and Elections, which is an umbrella organization of American Muslim organization. I absolutely premise that connecting the dots, we can maximize our existing resources, and especially with the networking. And one of your way, you have passed the card, so we can remain connected. I absolutely agree. But there is another component of Islamophobia or any hate crimes, which are sponsored even by the state, and we may not realize it unless we look into it. For instance, I don't have the reference in front of me, but I can provide to anybody. It's one of the associate judges in the United States. It's about 10 years back, almost 10 years back. He has said, and that was his remarks. He said that you could be detained indefinitely based upon your faith. And it has not been challenged yet. And now, today, if we look up there, NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, which is based upon, which says that anybody could be, detained indefinitely without any charges or the due process of the law. And it is unspoken words, and there is a main understanding where this law would be applied. Though the good news is there are people, as you said, connecting the dots with, utilizing the existing resources, networking. Thank God, there are individuals, organizations who are there, who are standing up and challenging, those state, so to speak, state-sponsored. In the campaign, if you look, some of the candidates openly have said it. Stuff like this, things like this, that I will not hire a Muslim candidate for the employment, if they are elected, he or she is elected for the presidency. And within that particular party, no one has even challenged that, in a sense that it should be challenged, So those are the environment. I think with these comments, I not only fully endorse and I agree with your notion that we need to connect the dots. We need to have more utilizing and maximizing the existing resources. I fully agree with that. And I thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. When I visited Washington, D.C. and visited the Holocaust Museum there the first time, and we have a Holocaust Museum here, very accessible to us in Skokie. But the one in Washington, D.C. has one big wall that is the stepping stones that led to the Holocaust. Little tiny statements and things that were in the media and policies that became put in place one by one until finally this incredible thing could happen. And I feel like that is what we have to pay close attention to. I think everybody should go to the Holocaust Museum in Skokie, and everybody should go to Washington, D.C., and we should study and we should all learn how these things happen. I certainly think that anybody, to me, being Jewish means I have to be at the front of the line fighting against bias and discrimination. But some of those things you know, after this NYPD surveilling of Muslim student organizations, for example, I saw reports where parents were telling their Muslim students, please don't join the Muslim student organization. I'm worried about you. You know, you'll be surveilled, you're innocent, I don't want your name in the national paper. And those are the kinds of stepping stones that begin to isolate people, so then people can't come together, they can't socialize, they can't network, they can't strategize. There are many, many such things, exactly what you were saying, that have become part of our everyday culture and the policies where it becomes institutionalized. And then nobody argues with it because, as I said, the advertising campaign has been effective. So anybody, please, I want other people to question or comment or share anything that this program has brought up for you. Sorry? You put it all on the card. Well, would you share like a few of the things, the highlights of what you put on the card?
Okay, I'm going to. Okay, I'm Zakia. I'm Algerian, of Turkish descent. I wrote to you this after realizing that you gave us a wonderful lecture. Dear Anya, at first I didn't think I would have any use of the blank card you provided us all with prior to the lecture. However, as the lecture progressed, I started to change my mind to the point of thinking and wishing the planet had more people like you. I think you are magnificent, very eloquent, and definitely want my heart, my thought, the process, my approval of what you stand for in this life. Your way of viewing things is the way things ought to be. That is the only way, susceptible to bring peace to the world and eradicate xenophobia. I have no doubt as a Muslim about your sincerity on this subject that has been causing most of the turmoil our planet has known and suffered since the appearance-ism of life on it. And what's particularly commendable about your entire persona is that you chose to be an ally instead of an alien to your fellow human beings. I agree with your crusade and support it. I myself have always been a fervent defender of justice and equity for all. You went even deeper to only suscitate my admiration for your limitless tolerance and acceptance of the other. My hat is down to you.
You write very small. Thank you very much. That was very, very endearing. How about some comments or personal stories? Is there something that you can share about your own experience around these issues, or anything at all that this program brought up for you? I would love to hear. Yeah. This gentleman.
I would like to go back to 1999.
You would like to?
Go back to
1999.
Of that Benjamin Smith's.
Sorry?
Benjamin Smith's case.
Yes.
When some Jews were returning from Sabbath.
Yes.
And he came from Peoria, I guess, and he shot on them.
Yes.
And the boy, Abraham, was wounded. And that time I was working as co-chair I was working with the Interreligious Partnership in Logisburg as a co-chair.
Right.
And Anne Walk, she was our organizer. And the Interreligious Partnership, we decided to have a meeting, a public meeting, to denounce this heinous act. And the first meeting took place in my house, in my living room. There were about 20 people from different walks of life. There were Jews and Muslims, Christians, and Hindus. And we thought that probably 150 people would come. And we chose Indian Model Park in Rajasthan for the meeting. Somebody said that we have to take permission from the city. So we sent the word to the city for permission. And there came the news that it is not only that they are going to give the permission, but also Mayor Daley is going to come. And then it was a different story, because that evening, something like about 800 people from different places, they gathered together, and we had a very large gathering, and everybody denounced. And it was a wonderful demonstration of solidarity. And we gave a message very loud and clear to the people who behave that way, that it will not be tolerated. So what you are saying, and you have already mentioned about that particular instance, and after a few days, person was killed. Another Korean boy was killed in Indiana, as Benjamin Smith was chased by the police. It showed to me a new light in my life. But at the same time, these interfaith meetings and dialogues, they opened my eyes, because I was pushed into this particular environment accidentally, that my Islamic Center of Chicago at Peterson and Lincoln, where I used to go for my weekly prayers. The director, he had asked me to go and attend one of those meetings because he was not able to go at that time. I was very reluctant and I refused. I said that I never go to any religious meetings. I never go to any faith-based meetings. All my life I have been living as a social worker, providing service to those who are in need of the service without thinking what they are and what they are. And he said that, no, you go and you will not regret it. He was right. I was accepted by the group. I had an experience of a lifetime there. I have very good friends among them. Because of my work with that particular group, that I was chosen to become the trustee on the board of trustees of the Department of World Religions. That's how I attended the convention in South Africa that you mentioned to me earlier. The important thing is that we have to carry this mission. We have to be bold about it. Any kind of sectarianism, any kind of extremism, any kind of xenophobia, etc. Anyhow, we should have the courage to fight and defend those who are a prey to that. And that's why I like my Congresswoman, Costa, who is a good friend of mine, and he's a good friend of everybody. Because I have never heard anybody saying that she is not a good person. And I guess we have to move forward, look into what we have said, develop these networks, and as my friend Salim has said that, to connect the dots, move beyond ourselves, to make this place, this world, in general, but especially America, which is now passing through difficult times, we should try to stand it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to say about interfaith as a word. It's a great word, and there are so many wonderful interfaith events, and we did chat before the program about the Parliament of the World's Religions, and we probably bumped shoulders in South Africa in 1999, where I was invited to bring my project around race in Open and Shut Case, the book that I talked about briefly. I also think that the word interfaith is a little problematic because there are so many wonderful people who do not profess any faith. They don't practice any particular faith, and they live incredibly compassionate, moral lives. They work so hard for justice, and somehow I feel like we need a word that helps be more inclusive to them as well, as connected as I am to interfaith activities and organizations. And the other thing that I also wanted to mention about that relates to religions is that in the course of my journey, I have been a house guest in a Hindu home, in a Sikh home. I have had exposure to so many different people from so many different religions and backgrounds, and participated in religious services. And I always say, I absolutely do not care what is in anybody's holy book. You know, I just came from a conference in Dearborn, Michigan, and every once in a while at these conferences, people start arguing over, but it says this in the Bible, or it says this in the Quran, and they start cherry-picking passages and tussling about them. And I always say, I have no interest. I mean, if I had a whole other lifetime to study comparative religion, I think it would be very interesting, but I don't have enough time to do what I'm trying to do already. So I'm not spending my time reading the various great books of the world that pertain to religions, but I don't care what's in them. I really have no interest in what's in them. You can pull out a passage and say, look, it's terrible, isn't it? And I'll go, yeah, it's a terrible passage, but and then pull out some passage that's a beautiful passage, like the Golden Rule, which in variations, exists in almost every religion. But what I care about is how people live their lives. And when I see how people live their lives, that's where I form, like some sense of, I have Catholics who are they're like Dorothy Day or Mother Teresa friends who are just doing the most extraordinary work. And of course, in the news, I read some horrible things about some Catholics who are doing horrible things. And that's the same for Jews and Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and all of that. I really feel cautious about an aspect of interfaith events. I'm not, at Northwestern I once attended a program that was called Islam 101, Judaism 101, and I thought it was a colossal waste of time and opportunity. The Jews and the Muslim students came into the room together, and there was good food like there is here, outside on the, on a table, and they said, no, you can't eat it till after the program. I was like, let them eat. They're students, they're hungry. And then the two professors got up and, said, this is what Judaism 101 is, and this is what Islam 101 is. And then they said, oh, we only have 15 more minutes that we can be in this room, so eat your food, and then I'm sorry, you have to go. And nothing happened. There was no friendship, there was no exchange, there was no, real breaking of bread together. So I always say, get into each other's lives in living rooms, but don't talk religion and don't talk politics. Talk about gardening, talk about raising your children, talk about, education, talk about how you celebrate a holiday, what the recipe is for this wonderful food that you brought us. Those are the things that begin to make the connections, and then you'll care so much about the people that you won't care what's in their book.
That was the reason that
Sorry?
That was the reason that I was reluctant to go to
Yes.
religious meetings.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that the group with which I work, the International Association of Lions Clubs.
Yes, Lions Club.
I have been working with them for the last 35 years. And the beauty of the group is that we never ask about what your religion is or what my religion we only come forward to deal with the problem and understand each other as human beings, and then see the force. Take the case of tsunami. It was devastation all over the world. Lands from all over the world, they just went to the places without being asked, with millions of dollars pouring there.
Right.
Millions of dollars pouring there. The same thing happens to earthquakes. One of the Pakistani friend of mine said that what the lands have done for the earthquake in the north of America, north of Pakistan. He didn't know that how many millions have been sent there as a donation, and how many lives work there in those core areas. So the situation, what you are saying is true, that sometimes the interfaith is also a dubious terminology. But I think that is the faith of the people, that they don't have any faith. You may define the faith in your own way, but faith is not what it's defined as. Yes. So I guess that that's very important, that what I say to you and how I behave is more important. Take the case of what happened in the aftermath of September 11th. American Jewish Council, AJC, they had, you might be surprised that I have been here today, but the truth is that that's how I brought myself. They had a one-day seminar. I'm forgetting the name of the person who took the seminar. He trained us how to deal with hatred. So these are very good, strategies that there are there people want to be interested in. They can develop themselves. And I would suggest to those people who are around me that if they have the interest, you should move forward, and then they can develop their own strategies. And that is the connection of art. Thank you.
Can we have just a few others, or one or two?
Yeah, we just have one last question,
Okay.
and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
I'm sorry I took away too much time.
Thank you. You made a very compelling case for the value and importance of getting in, as you said, getting in each other's lives and each other's living rooms. And you gave the example of the neighborhood walks after 1999. Can you just quickly tell us a few other very practical strategies for folks who don't automatically, run into someone who is, quote, other at the knitting store? What are some ways that we could recommend to people who haven't had this experience?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Here's Program B is the initiatives and the strategies, or just here's a few of them. So sharing events, like what I referred to in my own, living room, that's something that's easily replicable in a community, and I really emphasize not setting it up as a festival of cultures, but finding some way to say it's more like an open mic. Just come and one year our theme was celebrating the darkness as well as the light. And you can throw out a theme if you want to that's very general, or or design it in some way, but just help people to come and share little slivers of their soul so that we can see each other. The walks, I think, can be replicated, easily replicated on college campuses in New York and Chicago, in small towns, big towns. There could be a Facebook page, a Walk Your Talk Walks page, where people could write their stories and say, if you're visiting New York, our walks are Sunday afternoons and Wednesday evenings, and they meet at Union Square. Or in Chicago, they meet underneath the Marshall Fields clock. Well, Macy's, but everybody who grew up in Chicago knows that it's really the Marshall Fields clock. What I said when I asked you to fill out the card in the beginning, name, contact information, and a few lines. Think of all the meetings we all go to, all the programs and conferences we go to. There's so much rich resource there for people to find each other and connect. Obviously, be an ally. Step out into the zone of saying, I want to support your group, I want to stand up for your group, and then I guarantee you'll get invited into other, the living rooms of the people who you're aligning with. Join the club, be an activist. If hate is the problem, how can hate be the solution? That's just a little saying that I'd like to throw in. I think we should be creating clearinghouses or databases with contact lists of people so that there are incredible people who are working around Islamophobia, but there isn't like one list somewhere where I can tap into it and say, I want to put my name on this list because I want you guys in New York to know my name, so that when the ground zero controversy was happening, that people would know to contact me, and that I could speak to this issue, or I can bring somebody and we can bring people and connect together. So kind of creating good lists, and social media is obviously, you know, something that we have now that we didn't used to have. I don't know why, but people aren't putting together conferences now that incorporate Sikhs and Muslims and Hindus and South Asians in rooms together, because these are the groups that are being impacted by the xenophobia. The Islamophobia is sort of, you know, up here and being talked about all the time, but then just last week there was a Sikh family in Colorado, I think, who had a letter to the Turban family, move out of this town or we're going to kill you. So we should be working together. Everybody should be working together, but certainly some of these groups who are most under the gun, who are being considered the other, you know, that vague category of, oh, well, you kind of look terrorist to me, you know, that sort of thing. I think that we should organize field trips to the Holocaust museums. I think that everybody should go, and we should all study and learn about how these kinds of things that we've been talking about here can move step by step into some absolutely catastrophic human event. And I think, yeah, go ahead.
I visited New York. I was the first one in Jerusalem to the Holocaust. What, given this poisonous atmosphere in the United States, Islamophobia and killing and beating women, the women died in Los Angeles.
Yes.
Do you think that would really, this frenzy, political whatever in the United States, would lead to a Holocaust in the United States?
Well, you know, I think that's a hard thing to predict. But what I'm saying is that when we see the cartoon, like the cartoon that I showed you, when we see the statements, when we see politicians saying, you know, there's a person who has a radio program who said, so let's kill 100 million Muslims. So what if there are, you know, it's just a small percentage of how many?
They say 1.5 billion.
Yeah, they'll say, but at least there'll be 100 million less. So, you know, and if you read any article that relates to Islam or Muslims, underneath it you see genocidal comments. So I don't know where the world is going, but I know that.
No, I mean, speaking of the United States particularly, not the world.
Yeah, I don't know, but I'm scared. I'm scared. And there is somebody who I want to just let you add.
I just feel I feel that Americans generally don't seem to see that Islamophobia is like anti-Semitism. They think one is evil and one is perfectly understandable because these nasty Muslims, look what they did to us. Even though if you're on the other side, you might say, well, you made Iraqi children starve to death by the 100,000s, not just 3,000. Or you can say, without health insurance, 300,000 Americans may die. So there is so many things that Americans seem to be totally blind to because they always feel we are good. I was after 9/11, I was sitting in a Unitarian church, and there was the minister who said, I don't understand why they did this to us. We are good people. And I think that blindness, yes, it's nasty to do something to Jews because they're white like us, but the rest of them, that's my impression.
Yeah. I think, you know, have you all seen the New Yorker cover where New York looks like it's so big that it's like the center of the universe, and everything else, you know, is tinier and tinier and tinier. So I think we all have this tendency to be ethnocentric and think.
See, I feel feel
my
that
group.
every German should go to a Holocaust museum, but I think Americans need to go to a Native American genocide museum.
Yes.
Should go to a black slavery museum. Holocaust is not their issue.
Yes, I agree with you that we should study all of the genocides. We should study all of the machinery that has led to, you know, like the decimation of our Native American population. Luckily, thankfully, there is going to be a slavery museum on the Mall in Washington, D.C. I mean, it doesn't solve it, but it's long overdue. It's long overdue.
I would rather see that money put into a slavery museum given as scholarship to young, promising black students.
Hmm.
I feel museums are looking at the past and spending a lot of money in ingraining things that already have happened.
All right, well, thank you very much, Anya Cordell. Thank you so much for the thought-provoking talk. If we can all give her another round of applause. On behalf of Dr. Elliot Sever and the American Islamic College, I would like to present this gift to you.
Oh my goodness! Thank you.
This is original work. It's a Turkish form of water marbling. So
it's beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank
you all for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
A few announcements before we all leave. This Friday on March 30th, we have Dawood Bornsbury who will be performing here at the AIC Auditorium. Tickets are $10. For more information, you can see one of us. And then we also have a free event coming up on April 28th.
Thank you so much.
You can see the Honorable Secretary of State of Illinois, Jesse White, and the Honorable Anita Alvarez, Cook County State Attorney, speak, as well as watch performances live from the Polish Wiki dancers, the Indonesian consulate group, and a lot more. So please join us then, April 28th. Look forward to seeing you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You should give a round of applause.
Yes.